Hi everyone, thank you very much for being here today. I'm François Flech from the marketing department, and here is Philippe Ogonet as well today with me. Hi Philippe. Um,
Hello, everybody.
Hi Philippe. So today is the fourth and last episode of our PcVue Tech web series, Maintain Your PcVue project. Today we're going to cover HDS Monitoring, the SQL Server database module of PcVue. Once again, thank you for joining us. Just to remind you, if you're not used to, the questions are possible, but not by audio. There's too many people today, but you can write your question through the chat or Q&A interfaces, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. Thank you. So this is the last episode. There's 3 other episodes. They are available on our YouTube channel if you need. And today we cover the historical data server base. So we'll cover an overview. Then we'll see what is the database manager and how we can use it, the redundancy of databases, and the maintenance plans. And at the end, Philippe will show you use cases via a demonstration just to show you how does that work and in PcVue. So what is the HDS? So HDS stands for Historical Data Server. So it's the component, the module used by PcVue to record all the real-time data to a SQL Server database. It's a built-in component, so it's very optimized in terms of connection and also for exchanges. So it's a dedicated module built in PcVue to record real-time data to SQL Server. So it's reliable and it's optimized in terms of performances. It also allows redundancy management. So if you have several databases, you will be able to copy the content of one to another if needed. We also provide a database manager, which is a specific tool to manage the databases. And it's also possible to run maintenance plan for the database. The database manager, it is a GBMS management tool coming with PcVue, and it allows exactly the same, it's a similar tool as the SQL Server Management Console, but it's coming with PcVue, so it allows to browse your database, to display and modify some properties and content of database. It also allows to configure replication between 2 databases if you want to copy the content of one database to another. You will be also able to perform some usual tasks for database, such as shrink, delete, and also you will be able to manage the security and the user from this database manager. And once again, this tool is coming with PcVue. One of the tasks you can perform within PcVue for your SQL Server database is maintenance plan. You can do automatic maintenance task or scheduled maintenance task depending on your need. It includes purge, export, defrag, or shrink, for example. It's kind of usual task for a maintenance plan. And each task is associated to a specific database. And then you can execute the maintenance plan either for one or several databases. So the use case we gonna see during the demonstration performed by Philippe. First is the replication of a database, how you can synchronize databases. then how you can create and use a maintenance plan for the specific case of an export, and finally how you can diagnostic the problem in case of disconnection, for example, using traces and system variables. So I give the hand to Philippe for the demonstration. So Philippe, I give you the role of presenter so you can share your screen and show how it works in PcVue.
Okay, thank you, Francois. Hello, everybody. So I'll share my screen. Indeed.
Okay, we see your screen.
You see everything all right? Okay. Indeed, the demo will be about HDS and maintenance about HDS, so historical data server. I will present you first the database, how to use the database manager. Then afterwards, how to maintain databases with the use of a maintenance plan created within PcVue. And then we'll see different elements for diagnosis, such as traces, such as system variables that are related to the HDS, and a use case to simulate a disconnection and see how to diagnose this and how the system behaves. So first, starting with the database manager, you can reach it from the PcVue menu here and launch the database manager. The tools presents this way, so it will allow you to perform, to view the data of one or different databases, to manage several databases, do some replication from one to the other, for example, and to perform several actions on databases. So we'll be using a SQL Server database, and we will add the first database. So you have to connect to a SQL Server instance. Hopefully it should come. Hopefully. So to set the connection with the database, you will first have to select the source, so the name of the SQL Server instance that is installed. So one that is installed here locally on my machine. You have to specify the user which you will connect to the database, so either Windows user or SQL Server user. So I'll be using classical SA user password. And then you have the list of the databases that are available. So I will be using both these database main and secondary database for my webinar application. So first connect to the main database, add, and you can see from there that the database has been connected to the database manager. So you then have access to the properties of the database. You have access to the different tables. So for the HDS, the trend table and the log table, for instance, according to type of data you're recording. If you go to the trend table, then you have possibility to access the data. Go to the tab here, view data, execute the request, and there you see that the data that is within the trend table is visible here. What can be noticed is for the timestamp, so the field here, timestamping, the timestamping is in fact in GMT timestamping. So don't be puzzled if you have a different time difference with your local time system. The data are recorded with the GMT timestamping. Afterwards, we can view the data. We can also perform some actions on the database itself. So if you go back to the database root, and then you do right click, you have access to different menus, actions that you may perform. So for example, remove the database from the database manager. So that simply deletes the database from the database manager interface. Whereas the delete menu underneath would delete definitely the database from the SQL Server instance. You can then have actions as to shrink database, do some replication, close the connection to the database, change the login, detach if you want to move the database, for example, to another instance or another machines, etc. So now I can also do the same, connect to my second database. So go back to the root here, add, again, connect to the SQL Server instance. There it is. So select your server and instance, select the user. So again, I will be using SQL Server authentication with the SA username, password, and then I select my secondary database, add it. So I now have access from the database manager to both my databases that are linked to my project. Again, I can have access to the tables of my secondary database. And if I go, for instance, to the train table, view data tab, execute, then I might see that this database is not as complete as the main database, since in fact it's only the main database that is connected to my application, so that is fed by the data being refreshed on my project. So in fact, the secondary database, in order to be complete, would have to collect the data from the main database, and that will be done with the help of the replication tool, which is here. So I will create a replication object for this. So right click, add, and it will connect a wizard. And I simply have to follow the steps. So first name of my replication object, I can call it replication, for instance. Next, I will configure the database that I will attach to this replication object. So I'll first select my first database, the main one. I will select more specifically the train table that will be taking the data to replicate. Then I will connect to my second database, and again fetch also the train table so that the data from the first database will be connect to the second one. So I have my two databases here with the both tables. I have then to select by clicking on both train table and add a link so that both tables will be linked in order to copy data from one to the other, or vice versa. Then I will follow the different steps of the wizard. I can replicate data in a bidirectional way, for example, from one to the other. But in that case, I will only choose unidirectional to copy the data from the main database, which is the fullest of both, to the secondary database, which is the one where data is missing. Then I go to the running options, asking if I will perform the replication either on demand or in a scheduled way. And so I will choose on demand, and I will choose to replicate all data. Then I end up the wizard, and hence, thus, my replication object has been completed. So I may now use it from the PcVue project. So in the PcVue project, I have this train view, which is running in real time and shows the data that are currently involving in my projects. So these data mainly are being stored in the main database, and the replication will make so that they will be also, by the process of replication, be copied to the second database. So for here, we'll have a button that will enable you to perform that thanks to a SCADA basic script. So I'll simply have a look at the SCADA basic program, which allows us to perform this. It's this replication program. If I open it, simply, it's quite simple. You have a procedure, a function that will launch an application. So that application will be the replication manager application that is located under the bin directory of PcVue, as other programs. And there are also different options that will be used by this replication manager. So I'll need to specify the name of the replication object I've configured in the database manager. I also will have with the T here the amount of time that I will be replicating. So that will correspond to 5 minutes. Last 5 minutes. Here with the L option, 300 corresponds to the number of steps. So in fact, replication taking place will be divided into a several number of steps, and this shows how many steps will be executed to copy the data from one database to the other. So that's to show the content of the program. Then I will launch the replication from the button here. So in the process, you see that this window is opened. You may hide it if needed. In that case, it was chosen to display so that you can see what is occurring. So different steps and the data being recopied from one database to the other. The result of that, well, you may see afterwards, go back to the database manager and view the results by accessing, again, my secondary database, go to the tables, trend table, view data, execute, and then it should have copied the data. So the data being dated from the latest that are being recorded here and being copied from the name database. You could see according to these time stamping, so it's 11:47 GAT time, which is more or less, yeah, corresponds to the time, the current time. Okay, so the data has been replicated from the main database to the secondary database for the trend table. We'll now have a look at the maintenance plan. So that is to show how to handle, maintain the databases within PcVue so that they will not grow endlessly, for example, and while they would not grow endlessly, they would end up being full. In fact, if you don't do any maintenance, for instance, and in the end, you would not be able to use them normally to store the data. So you have to perform some maintenance actions on the databases so that you can store data from PcVue in a normal standard process. So this will be done from the Application Explorer. If I go to in my tree archive, my databases, I have both my database, the main one, and the secondary one. If I go on the properties of the database, SQL Server tab, I can see that there is by default an emergency purge that is programmed. So this emergency purge allows you to assess if, for example, the database has reached a certain percent of its size, for example, 80% here. And in that case, PcVue will remove a certain amount of data. For example, here, 10% of the data volume will be removed from the database. So this could be judged as practical to implement. However, it's first, the inconvenience will be that first it will need consume a certain amount of memory while it's being performed. So it's not very, can have some influence, negative influence on behavior of the system, of the process. And second, you do not know which data are going to be removed from the database. So it's not necessarily, for example, the most ancient data that will be removed from the database. So this mechanism is, as it's called, emergency purge. It's an emergency mechanism. It's there as a safety net, but you should not rely on this mechanism to maintain your database. Instead, you should be using a maintenance plan that can be either configured from the SQL Server native tools or from PcVue with the maintenance plan that are available here. So to do that, I go on this route, add a maintenance plan. And to make it effective, I will have to create a schedule saying when it's executed and also the tasks that will be performed by this maintenance plan. So first the schedule, you go in the properties here, schedule, click on the button, you have access to the scheduler interface, and then you can program a trigger that will tell when the process of maintenance will be launched. So you go on the trigger, edit the trigger, you can specify the date when it will be executed. So for example, on the 29th, and I will say, let's make it 56. Then you can also repeat the tasks on a regular schedule, for example, every hour, every day, every week, every month, etc. Choose to repeat it every hour. And so once this is set, I close the interface. So that will be launched in about 2 minutes. Which should leave us enough time to then see the tasks. So in the maintenance plan, you will have a chance to add one or more tasks. For example, here you may add a task of exports, other choices, purge, defragmentation, custom script, or shrink of the database. So for example, I'll first add an export task, and in this export task, I have an export tab related to it, and I will select the period to export. So for example, last day, and set a time offset to 0. and then you have the file format in which the data will be exported. I can also add another task. For example, I will add a task of shrink, for example. So this one has no specific option. If I apply it, then I may see the different tasks. And I can also see the sequence number. So that means the export will be performed first and the shrink in the second rack. If the export then has been performed, we should see the results in the directory under PcVue. So here, PcVue version 15, database, which contains several files associated to the database that are handled by the HDS. Then I have an export subdirectory, and then I have the directory for the first domain database, and within here a trend table and log table directory, and then I will find the files that have been exported. So if I get the last one, should be this one. I can open it with Notepad, and I can see the data that has been exported from the maintenance plan by the export task. I should normally also have same directory for the secondary database but maybe due to the synchronization, since we programmed it at 1:56 my time, and it was almost the time when I finished validated the maintenance plan, this task for the export for the second database may not have taken place due to lack of time. But normally you should have also a directory for the secondary database if both databases are exported. And with this data then, so with the data files, then afterwards I can, if I wish, import this data into database again. For example, if it has been exported a long time ago, and this can be done with the PcVue tool, which is called database import. Okay, so that's for the maintenance plan. Afterwards, we will see the latest part, the last part, which refers to a diagnosis. So traces, system variables, and we'll have also use case to show how do you diagnose problem, for example, loss of connection with the databases. So HDS is, as a PcVue, a module that will generate some traces. So if you are familiar with the directory where the logs are generated by PcVue, so that's under PcVue 15 if I'm version 15, bin directory, and then I go to log files directory. This is where traces are generated by PcVue, and it will also be here that we'll find the traces that are generated by the HDS module. Mainly this file here, hds.log, is the file that contains the information, the trace information generated by the HDS module. So see, for example, during the last session, you have traces that are related to project loading, traces where it will fetch the different configuration files, so the .dat files here, and information that shows what is happening while HDS is running. You could also have traces that refer to errors if they have some error connecting to the databases, for example, warnings, etc. Mind the letter here, right after the HDS, for example, I stands here for information trace. You could also have E for error, W for warning, so I for information, and A for audit. So this can give you a hint of what the kind of importance this trace has. You also have other files that contain traces. For example, you have the sv.log that contains traces also that are generated by the log monitor, so another tracing tool. These traces, so the traces that are in the HDS file, the main HDS traces, can be configured from the HDS window, which stands here. So the server with the green circle here allows you to have access to the HDS window, in which you will be able to configure the trace that you can find in either trace file or in the HDS window. So with the debug general parameters, you have here a different level of traces that will be set and for file traces, so traces that will be stored into the hds.log file. So you can choose different levels: error, warning, information, audit, and sub-levels. Have to be careful with the audit trace because this can be very costly in terms of process. So it's only for specific use that you would have to set these traces, but also only on a temporary basis, since you would not want these traces to run on in the long term. So that's only for diagnosis for a short time. So these are files, traces related that will go to trace files. The boxes underneath do the same, select the trace levels that will go into the HDS window. So screen traces that will be displayed in the window that appears here with the debug trace menu. There I have the same as what goes into the files. So same principle, the traces of what is happening within the HDS while the HDS is running. So for example, in this type of window, you would find traces when the HDS is starting. Also traces when it's loading the database, when it's loading tables and the columns of the table with different fields of information. Same for secondary database, etc. So here, for example, I have an example of warning trace. If there's a trend that has been recorded at several same trend that is recorded at different places. Okay, also I can see the traces of the tasks that have been performed before. So the traces of my exports that took place here. So at 1356, that's the one we configured before. So beginning of the export, end of the export, or the different tables. So we only see the ones that were for the main table that was exported. The second one did not have the time to. And afterwards, you would see, if you had had more time, the traces that are associated to the second task that was the shrink. Other trace files, you have the macro trace here, so hds.macrotrace, which is really the main traces that are being kept and selected within this file, but that allows you to see what is happening more in the long term, whereas the HDS will be the last session where PcVue and HDS were started. You also have HDS1, HDS2, which correspond to the previous sessions. So HDS1 was the previous session, HDS2 previous before the previous, etc. So that allows you to go back in time, seeing what happens with the HDS, and the macro trace gives you a selection of all of these. So that's for the traces. Afterwards, we can have a look at the system variables. So system variables are located under the Application Explorer, under the variables tree, have the system root, and you see you have a root that is associated to HDS. So in this root, you also find variables that are common to all HDS and so to all database, more to the process. And then afterwards, you have a root associated with each database. So for the main one, the secondary one, also with variables that refer to each of these databases. So for instance, at the HDS root, you have, for example, a flag that shows if HDS is started. You have the number of pending records, if there are some data that are being piled within the HDS and before being stored into the databases. You have flag to show whether HDS is in overflow. You have the number of counter of errors, for example, if you have some errors generated by the HDS. And for the databases, for example, for the main one, you have information, for example, that will tell you whether the HDS is connected or not to that database with the disk-on flag. You also have variables that will show you whether this database is full, whether the local disk where the database is stored is full, and also trace information if there's a task being in process. For example, if the database is being compacted, if there's a custom task, defragmentation, purge, export, etc. So this variable showing you whether this task is being in process or not. Okay, so I will be able to use then afterwards all this information to show you a use case that would be the simulation of a loss of connection with my databases. So for that, I will, since my database are locally stored on my PcVue machine, I will actually stop the SQL Server service here, stop it running. In order to have to simulate a loss of connection with my database. So there I can monitor with my system variables on my databases. I can follow the disk-on flag and see that it has been put to 1, so meaning that my HDS has lost connection with the main database. Should be the same with the secondary database. See, its disk-on has been set to 1. And then afterwards, for example, here I have the error counts at the HDS root, which is gradually increasing as the errors are being counted while the HDS cannot have access to the databases. In the traces also, you can have a look at the HDS window. So again, go to the debug trace. And then I can see now several errors, which will show me that HDS has lost connection with the data source. See several traces here, here again, and here. So symbolized by the E letter for error. That shows you that there's an error occurring on the system. So from then, well, I can have a look at the trace and investigate what the problem is between the HDS and the database system. So if it's in a remote database, well, that might be to a loss of connection on the network between the two. So look for errors regarding the network, router, whichever cause can be provoking the loss of connection between my SQL Server and my HDS machine. If on my case, in our case, since the SQL Server is local and easier to deal with, you know that since we closed the service, it's quite obvious that a loss of connection is due to that. So then I will restart my service in order to restore the connection between my databases and HDS. So same again, I will be able to monitor the trace to see if I'm getting connected again to the database, which you have the trace that would correspond here, connecting to the database main database successfully connected. And I will also see that from the system variables. For example, in the main database, I can see the disconnection variable has been reset to 0 again. So I have found the connection. Again, with my main database, secondary database is a bit longer. Still currently being disconnected, but should end up reconnecting in the end. Hopefully. Second database is a bit longer. There it is. So this connection to 0, so that means I have found the connection again with my secondary database, and I should have, yes, the corresponding traces here. So then I can check that during the loss of connection with my database, the data, in fact, has been temporarily stored within the buffer within PcVue. So I can go to my window, my trend window, and go to historical mode. Select a time gap. So from last hour, okay, apply. Time gap is a bit too wide. Go back again. 29 is today's dates. Ah, no. Change the time gap. So it's form 15. Yeah, there it is. So in fact, here it was the real, whereas in the database, it's GMT time, it's real time. So my local time is 14:15, and I going back 1 hour backwards when I have some data before my application was not lost. So this is why you did not see the data between 11 and 12 o'clock. So that makes sense. So from 1 to 2, so that's the last hour. We see that the data has been completely has been kept and not being lost. Since even though connection with the databases was lost, the data has been bufferized by PcVue, and this would be done to show you in files that are located under the PcVue database directory, the .hds file corresponding to each database and each table trend and log. That would be storing temporarily the database, the data while the database is not available, and then when the database is available again, then the data is transferred from these files to the database so that the database is complete and has lost no data. So that's it for the presentation. Hope it was clear, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philippe, for this great presentation. So this is the time for question if there is. So please feel free to write down your question on the chat interface if you have some, and we'll be more than happy to answer to it. Okay, so let's answer this question. So is it possible to trigger a backup from PcVue? That is one question. I don't know, Philippe, if you can answer to that. Is it possible to trigger a backup from PcVue?
Trigger backup from PcVue, yes, could be possible with the maintenance plan. In the maintenance plan, you have possibility to plan a custom task, and with that custom task, then you can add a SQL Server SQL script of your own. So the operation then could be done with this custom task from a maintenance plans, thus launched from PcVue.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Okay. So what are the difference between defrag and shrink in the maintenance plan? So I can answer to that. So okay. So the defragment is the way you reorganize the database content. The shrink is more to compress the data. So, but it's slightly different. But the point here is that it's not the point of it's not specific to PcVue. So it's more the process of the database itself. Okay, I don't know if there's other question. No, so if We are good. I don't know if Philippe, you want to add something?
No, I would say, I believe you have said the main thing roughly. The effects will be that in both cases that the database would take less place, for example. So defragmentation, reorganizing the data, and shrinking make that the size is reduced by compacting several files, as far as I know.
Okay, yeah, and it's important to note that in the performance will not be improved by shrinking. So instead of the defragmenting the indexes of the database should increase the performance. So, but we could discuss that more in detail apart from the webinar if the asker would like to have more detail also on the specific project. Okay, if there's no more question, obviously you can send us an email if you want to ask more questions or have more information. You must know also that this webinar has been recorded and will be available shortly on the YouTube channel. You will receive an email with the link very shortly. Thank you very much, Philippe, for your demonstration.
You're welcome, and thank you, Francois, and thank you all for your attention as well.
Thank you everyone for thank you everyone for being with us today, and hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and hope to see you for the next series of our webinar. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.